Business in the Community Ireland.
Good morning, everybody. You're very welcome to our knowledge session this morning on voluntary disclosure. I'm just going to give a moment or two while people join. We'll get started then. Okay, while we're waiting on people to join, we might just do a little bit of housekeeping. So we are going to record this session, so it will be available to you after the event. We'll have an opportunity at the end for questions and answers, and so you can speak directly with our panelists. But please, at any point during the session, as a question arises or you think of something, do put it into use the Q&A function there available to you. You should see it on the bottom of your screen. We have used the power that we have on Zoom webinar to mute everybody. So we can turn those back. We can turn on microphones towards the end, though, if people have questions. So if you just either put in a question or raise your hand, we can look after that. So we're going to get started, and I suppose for us, building a diversity profile is something that's key to our Elevate pledge. It's a cornerstone of it, really. And the reason behind that is because we know that it's not sufficient to just take a passive approach to diversity and inclusion. You actually have to be proactive, you have to take action. And we all know that if something matters, you have to measure it. So building a diversity profile is the measurement that will help you remain accountable and keep you on track towards achieving your ambition, towards identifying where you need to put in some extra work, where you're having successes, and so on. So there's, I suppose, a number of key points to think about in terms of internally building the business case for yourselves for why build that profile, or why invest time and resources into creating an understanding of the diversity that exists within your workforce. So first and foremost, it's around identifying the gaps and the opportunities. So you can see where you have underrepresentation. You can then look at targeted strategies that can allow you to create a more balanced workforce, a workforce that is more reflective of the diversity out in wider society. Again, then once you have evidence, you can create data-driven insights to form the policies, to form the activities, to form the interventions that you're going to adopt throughout the business in terms of fostering inclusion and equity. Creating the data then gives you your baseline. It allows you to monitor your progress over time. It allows you to see where you're having success. It allows you to see where something is not as effective as you might have hoped, and it allows you to keep on track. Just then as well, and we all know it, employees or potential employees are really interested in this topic now, and they want to know that their employer is supportive of inclusion, supportive of minority applications, will work to support and promote and develop. So again, you can use the data and the information that you're gathering through that profile to really tell the story to prospective and current employees. And then again, one of the final things just to note is that we would always say that more diverse teams support innovation, better decision making across the organization, and so on. And understanding the diversity and understanding where you have diversity within the organization can help you maybe strategically leverage the advantage of having diverse teams. So all kind of good reasons to get started on building a diversity profile. I'm just going to quickly show this slide, and I know we'll cover some of it, or some of it will be covered in the discussion coming up in just a moment. But I thought it was interesting because people can be reticent to start the diversity profile, and they can feel that there may be pushback from colleagues. So just in terms of even understanding what some of that, where the motivation behind some of that pushback can be interesting. So this chart, it comes from a 2023 survey from the Investment Association, and you can see the biggest concern there from individuals is just concerns over data privacy. So who's going to see my data? How is it going to be used? Will there be negative consequences for me if I disclose particular information? So again, we might touch on that, and we can certainly talk to it later in the session as well. The second biggest one is apathy, and I just wanted to mention this specifically because sometimes when there are diversity surveys put out, or profiles are being built, people can think, well, nobody's interested in me because I'm in a minority group, or a majority group, so my response is not that interesting here. But it's important to really build a picture that we have a good, strong picture of in the widest sense. So kind of recognizing that there might be apathy, and then looking at strategies to combat that, I think is really interesting. I'm not saying that we've cracked it yet, and we can look at some of the disclosure rates that we've seen through Elevate, but I thought it was interesting when it was called out there as the second biggest challenge. And it's something that we might come back to again as well on that, and look at some strategies that might be helpful, or indeed some of you on the call may already have come up with some good interventions that have worked for you. So before we get into the substantive part of this morning, I just thought I'd share with you the disclosure rates that we showed in this year's report. So if you can see the numbers in the blue boxes are the number of companies that provided information on the particular indicator. So for example, 15 companies provided information on sexual orientation in 2024, which is a good jump up from 3 in 2022. Out of those companies, 23,866 employees actually provided information, which represented 16% of the overall collective Elevate workforce. So this image is just to show you where we're at. So we know that, for example, about 35 of the Elevate signatories have either already got a campaign in that where they are looking across the board at these indicators of diversity, or they plan to introduce a voluntary disclosure campaign. We have seen some increased confidence in voluntary disclosure, in that we are seeing year on year greater disclosure rates. I think we're very hopeful that we'll see a bigger step up in 2025. Because it does vary across the signatory base, but I think we're certainly seeing more activity this year on it, and more interest in capturing this data and understanding the benefits of capturing the data. So just wanted to share that with you, just to give you a sense of where we're at, and as we can see, there's room to improve when it comes to the data that we're receiving, and hopefully, as I say, we will see a step up for next year. So we're delighted that this morning we have A&L Goodbody joining us. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Richa, who's going to introduce Sinead and Aisling and take us through the discussion. And as I say, please feel free to use the Q&A function at any stage to ask any questions, or even put in some comments or thoughts that strike you. And we will go into a wider Q&A at the end. So Richa, over to you.
Thank you, Linda, so much for the introduction, and I really support you on the ambition that in 2025 we will possibly be seeing a bigger jump on the voluntary disclosure. So we are now going into a conversation with our colleagues from A&L Goodbody. So Sinead and Aisling, if I may ask you to turn on your cameras. Oh, you have, okay. And Sinead Smith, Head of Responsible Business, and Aisling Monieri is the Talent Director at A&L Goodbody. A&L Goodbody is a long-standing member of Business in the Community Ireland and amongst the first companies to sign up to the Elevate Pledge. In fact, even in the past as well, A&L Goodbody has shared their professional expertise to the campaign, and all of us benefited from the legal advice. And that is the power of the collective, the opportunity to co-create, co-design the solutions by utilizing the experiences from each other. And that's the ambition. So Sinead and Aisling, very welcome on today's session. Sinead, I may quickly come to you. You're managing the entire responsible business portfolio within the company. Can I please ask you to give us an understanding of what your role entails and how D&I fits in this wider context of responsible business?
Sure. Thanks, Richa. Can you hear me properly?
Loud and clear.
Great, because I just froze there momentarily and gave myself a fright. Hi, everyone. Yes, I am Sinead Smith. I'm Head of Responsible Business at A&L Goodbody. So, yeah, I mean, our responsible business practices, incorporate all of our environmental, social, and governance policies and initiatives, and I suppose specifically from the social side of things, we would focus on our community programs and what we are doing from a social mobility perspective in our local communities. We also pro bono practice, and what we do from a pro bono perspective in terms of reducing inequalities in our societies feeds into the S piece. Human rights is also an area that is under the social piece for us, and then that's where diversity and inclusion feeds into. So, I mean, our two main ESG ambitions as a firm and social issues that we are looking to tackle and support are reducing inequalities in our societies and tackling climate change, and very much our diversity and inclusion strategy, programs and initiatives feed into that piece around reducing inequalities in our society. So I, along with Aisling, am also a diversity and inclusion lead in the firm as well.
Yeah, and that kind of resonates very well with the pledge and how this entire campaign fits in. So Aisling, if I'll quickly ask you to come in, your role as talent director, D&I is day-to-day for you. It fits in very well with the role, but can you give us a sense of what it means to you?
Yeah, so obviously it is a huge part of my role here at A&L Goodbody, but is something that's just always been really important to me as a child and pretty empathetic person. I have a good sense of fairness, so would have been a focused. I would have had family members with physical disabilities. My best friend when I was really young had cystic fibrosis, so I had a real sense of just trying to be inclusive in all that we do. Nelson Mandela would have been like the icon. I would have had a poster of him on my wall as opposed to somebody else. And then more recently, I suppose, personally, I am married to a man from the Caribbean. So I have share 3 kids with him who are mixed race. So it's obviously really, really important to me from that perspective as well. And then I think from an A&L Goodbody perspective, it has, our focus on D&I has been just a massive game changer for the firm in so many things, the way we do, the way we work together, the experience people have. And I think we put a lot of energy into that. It's a huge part of the culture of the firm.
It is amazing. Thank you for sharing your personal stories, but it is amazing to see, for many, many decades, there was a very stark conversation going on about keeping boundaries between your personal and professional self. But what you realize more and more now that they're merging together, and how that impacts you as a person and how that impacts the culture of the organization. So very rightly said. And I may stay on with you, Aisling, very quickly to understand. 2023 was the first year that you ran the voluntary disclosure campaign within the company. Can you give us a sense of what was the thinking behind it, the planning process, and even maybe the timing, like why now?
Yeah, I think Sinead's actually going to take that question. She's just waiting to see what I was going to do.
Well, to be honest, Richa, we had been thinking about this long before 2023. In fact, myself and Aisling went to a conference in January 2020, which was just pre-pandemic, and we heard a presentation actually from Uber around their self-disclosure campaign, voluntary self-disclosure campaign. And we had said then, this is something that we really need to do, to take ourselves to the next level when it comes to being an inclusive organization. Because to be honest, and I know other corporates will feel the same when I say this, but we really have been on a very interesting D&I journey. And I know Aisling has referred to, the passion that we have for it, and really it is part of our culture. But Linda might remember this, over 10 years ago, when we were looking at developing our first, strategic D&I strategy, we sat around with business in the community saying, we want to build a D&I strategy and we want to be really inclusive. And we were asked, well, do you think you are an inclusive organization? And we all were like, absolutely. We are open, honest. We welcome everyone. It doesn't matter what you look like or who you are or what your background is. And, the response from business community was, that's great. And as we looked around the table, we saw we were all white, middle-class, people thinking we were, inclusive and diverse. And genuinely, we have made such progress since, and we have developed a great D&I strategy. We have developed, our people are very much part of that D&I strategy and implementing it. We have the 5 pillars that we focus on: gender, LGBT+, sexuality, accessibility, cultural diversity, and social mobility. They are 5 pillars, and we have people right across the business developing policies and practices to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible right across those pillars. However, we still were wondering, well, what progress are we making, and knowing that actually data can really help us understand the progress that we can make. And look, Linda has talked about all of the benefits, for creating a diversity profile. But, we really were saying we need to be asking, we need to get data from our people and from potential candidates that are going to work with us around their background, so that we can understand how are we progressing, and the areas that maybe we need to focus on where we're not progressing. So the Elevate pledge then, the commitment there was to disclose our diversity profile. So we said, okay, in 2023 we need to launch our self-disclosure campaign, and that's where we got to this point, which is I haven't even told you about what the campaign involves, but that's how we got to here.
Oh, that's yeah, and it's interesting when you know what you just said, that when you reflect on something that you feel and you realize that there's still scope and there's so much that you can do, and possibly data it is the starting point. And well, I can talk about data and with the two of you sitting here the whole day, but in the best interest. So I know that the campaign was developed and the intent was to understand where the organization is. How did you roll it out necessarily? And I remember in the past we've spoken about your diversity champions.
Yeah.
And so where do they fit in this whole campaign?
Yeah, so I'll just give you a little bit of understanding of what the campaign looks like and then how we engaged our people. So look, we launched the campaign, we called it Be Counted. We're very proud of that name. We were very we're divils for acronyms here, and because DARE is our gender initiative, DARE meaning Daily Action Real Equality. So we were like going, will we go with another acronym? But no, we went with Be Counted, and actually it really is it felt right for the name for our campaign. It's our own campaign. In that we haven't partnered with a third party to collect our data. Now Aisling will talk to that later and our reasons around that. And also we decided to have it as an open-ended campaign, as in we didn't decide to put a deadline for people to fill out the self-disclosure questionnaire, because we wanted it to be voluntary. We wanted people to feel that, you know, they had, you know, that we weren't saying you need to do this by a certain date, like other surveys that we have. However, we did, when we launched it, have a focused 3-week kind of a campaign where we sent out an email introducing it. We got our D&I champions to do a video encouraging people, and I'll talk to that later as well. And then, you know, thereafter we did a number of refreshers around encouraging people to remember to fill out the questionnaire. And now we include it also in our induction programs. So when our people join, we encourage people to fill it out on a voluntary basis as well. But I mean, there was a lot of prep involved in launching the campaign and in getting the messaging right to why we wanted to get our people to disclose information about themselves, and our D&I champions were so crucial to that. And we did a lot of sitting down with them, discussing it, and actually you know, at the very beginning, we involved them in actually pulling together the questions to make sure that we were asking the right questions, but also using the right language as well, and inclusive language to describe the questions. And so, and I know I've been involved in other peer networks around, particularly around social mobility, and asking people, you know, the question around being from a social mobility background or a lower socioeconomic background. I mean, if you look at other, and we were looking to other law firms, what they were asking in this area, they use metrics like, are you the first person from your household to go to college? What is the occupation of your parents? And our people were saying that they did not like that type of question to be asked, and that they would prefer it to be a more open question. And that's why we went with, do you consider yourself from a, what was it, Aisling? Do you consider yourself from a
socially
disadvantaged
background?
Yeah. So we went with that, and again, that was on the advice of our social mobility committee, saying to us, this is what we feel most comfortable with, and also socializing it with others. Again, the sexuality piece actually took a good bit of back and forth as well, and getting the language right. And then and even from a cultural diversity perspective, like we're forgetting areas or not describing a culture correctly. So that was a really interesting process for us and part of setting this up for success. And then,
sorry, I would just add to that,
yeah.
like, including people from each of those groups ended up with the questions being more relevant and more inclusive because of us. And I've had the pleasure of doing some college stuff with my kids in the last few weeks. And I think colleges could do with maybe engaging with people around them to make sure that they're doing the same. So I really do think it's important to have multiple stakeholders looking at the words that you use, because they can include and they can offend as well.
Yeah, and I mean, we really wanted then our champions to feel comfortable in championing the campaign, because we wanted them to be the champions of this and to encourage others. And we wanted them to be clear about the messaging, and that there was no misconception about what we were trying to achieve. And then So we felt there was, we got that understanding amongst ourselves. But before actually launching the campaign, we then held a workshop with you, Richa, and Linda. And we found that we brought together our D&I champions into the room with business in the community, so that our people could ask questions quite openly, and having that external voice there to explain what we are trying to achieve as part of the Elevate Pledge, but as an Irish society, was just really helpful and beneficial to the champions, but to the campaigns, at the campaign itself as well. And then we felt, after that, we equipped the champions with an FAQ, so that they felt supported if any of their team members or colleagues or friends were asking, why are we doing this, and what are we trying to achieve here? But also give them the comfort that, look, you don't have all the answers to this, and if you do have any further questions or don't know the answers, that you can come back to any of the diversity and inclusion leads, or indeed Aisling and her team, to support you on that. So we really did a lot of work before we launched the campaign, but we did then feel quite comfortable then, knowing we had done everything, I suppose, to set it up for a good rollout.
Yeah, and like I'm sure what we just heard, there's a significant amount of work that goes into building something that impacts each and every person within the organization. But I really liked one of the things that you said, Sinead, is to allow champions to be champion and equip them with the right amount of knowledge and communication and tools and the comfort levels for them to understand that they're not doing this just because they signed up to be a part of the diversity champions, but they're doing it because they believe in it, they're passionate about it, they understand what it is, and to have that comfort that they may not know all the answers, which is not very common. Like if somebody takes up a role, you always have this fear that, oh, I'm supposed to know everything. And D&I is such an evolving field that I don't think anybody has all the answers. You just keep exploring and doing things one thing at a time. Like we were saying earlier, Sinead, 1 day, 1 hour, 1 step at a time. And that's what it is. So there's loads that have gone into it, and sounds like a very robust campaign. Can you tell us a little about what are the kind of results that you got back, or did anything surprise you at all when people fill in the campaign? Aisling, maybe you want to come in on that.
Yeah, I think probably I think we're surprised at the amount of time it took to engage with people, to help them to understand in the first place why we wanted to do it, and then in the second how we were going to do it. So the giving their data, voluntarily entering their data, takes a lot of trust, and I think we can all appreciate that can be challenging for people, and everything that Linda said at the beginning, they're the type of challenges that we experienced, and that the conversations that we had with people, you know, around concerns about their data privacy and apathy, etc. We experienced all of that in the work that we did, and it was just a conversation which happened over and over again, to be fair, to try and make sure that people understood. We had looked at doing using an external vendor, and we explored that to some degree, and I think what we found was they seem to have better results in terms of the percentage of people who actually self-identify. But for us, we felt that, sorry, can you still hear me?
We can, yeah.
Okay, it's disappeared for me, but so for us, we just felt that having that data was just the representation. It was just going to see what proportion of our people identify in the same way as others in the community. But it wasn't going to help in terms of monitoring our own progress. It wasn't going to help in looking at our systems, policies and procedures and how impactful they're going to be. So are people of a certain, who identify in a certain way being promoted, hired, developed, etc., in the same way as others within the business. So we really wanted the data to be tied into our HRIS, so that in time we could start to run reports and check ourselves to make sure that we were and are as inclusive as we believe that we are, and that we were holding ourselves accountable from that perspective. And I think the other issue that I would say is that people who don't identify as diverse really felt, a majority, that they didn't need to participate. They didn't need to put their data in, because by default, we would just assume if they hadn't put in what their ethnicity was, then they were just, you know, white Irish. And so we worked hard to try to encourage people, and in our videos, some of our champions were non-diverse, and we're trying to persuade people the reasons why it was really important that for the integrity of the data, we really try to encourage people to self-identify regardless of whether they felt that they were diverse or not.
Yeah, and it's interesting that how definition of being diverse is very different in every person's mind, and you may feel that this is not for me, but diversity is only relevant when you know what you're comparing it against, and minority is only relevant when you know it is minority, or is it majority, or is it equal, or is this the area that we need to focus or not. So
yeah.
And
also, if you don't self-identify, if you don't think you're diverse, it could create a culture where people think, oh, they're tracking people who are different, but they're not tracking others. So it just is important that we just try to encourage that message that this is for everyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And since you already have the floor, Aisling, very quickly, were there any specific diversity related goals or targets that you had set in advance of the campaign being launched, that when we have this is what we aim to achieve?
Not particularly tied to this. I mean, we have very specific targets around female progression as a law firm. I'm sure lots of people would know within the professional services, women progressing to the top and becoming partners is a challenge. So that would be a focus for us. But we have collected gender data throughout, so we could show that, our target is 50-50 promotes on a rolling 3-year basis, and we've achieved that over the last 6 years. And a lot of work goes into that in terms of just the structures that are around there, from DARE that Sinead mentioned through to sponsorship programs and other elements of it. We also have some targets specifically around social mobility, and our recent diversity survey would show that that's a really important area to our people, to show that we are actively working to include people from different socioeconomic backgrounds in the firm. So our focus to date has been on our traineeship program and making sure that we have set aside a set number of places for our summer internship program, and that hopefully, and has over the last couple of years, led to placements in our traineeship program as well. But I do think over time we will continue to build on that, and as the data becomes greater and more relevant, I think it's important that we start to challenge ourselves on all of those elements. Are we reflective of society? And then as we go through, are people progressing in the way that you would expect them to, based on, you know, the norm within the business?
I may just quickly follow up on a thing that you said, socioeconomic status. Sinead mentioned before, and you're saying that this is a very important topic for people based on the survey. And socioeconomic status is not something that a lot of organizations are gathering even in their existing voluntary disclosure campaigns, but you chose to go with it in the first instance. And is this something, when you ran with this question, was this something at that stage as well driven by the employee sentiment, or was this something that's part of your goals as such? What was the thinking behind including it, and did you get a lot of responses?
Yeah, and we're a very privileged business based in North Key, and Sinead and the firm have done a huge amount of focus to try and ensure that we're connected and supporting the community as best as we can. So we always talk about North Key as our home, and this being our space, and wanting to make sure that we're contributing. But it was a surprise to us, particularly around our survey, how much that has resonated within the business, and how it is an area that people feel that we need to focus more on. I think we also learned we need to focus more on communicating what we are doing so that people are aware of that. And within our data, we do have people who are identifying as from a socioeconomically disadvantaged background, but we're not using that data yet in terms of any reporting, because it's too small to do that at this point.
Yeah, but over the years, hopefully, because if it's something that resonates with people, then this will be something that they would be interested in further pursuing. So that's great. And if a campaign which has been built with so much engagement from different stakeholders at different levels, and I know you were talking about it, that everybody can use by using different stakeholders. Who were your key stakeholders even before or the launch, or even now?
Yeah, our management committee obviously was huge in making sure that we had their support, which we did from the beginning. And then again, our D&I champions, we just can't underestimate how important they were, because this is a complex topic for people to get their head around. And personally, I found that interesting. I lived in America for 9 years. You had to report on all sorts of different things in America at that time, but they're obviously a longer way on their journey of being a diverse and mixed society. But for us, it really took a lot of work to get our D&I champions to understand. And then I think they truly felt empowered to help bring that message across, because they were so engaged in that. And again, just to reiterate Sinead's message, I think having the external support from VITC, being in that meeting and showing that, you know, this is important for the greater good, was, you know, really important.
That's great to know, because I think you need support. This is not something that you can run on your own, and you need your champions in different pockets within the company. Then you would always have someone who would come back with a question that you didn't think about.
Yeah.
So you need to have that. I'm conscious of the time. And you can decide amongst the two of you who wants to answer this. But from what I understand, and what in our previous conversations even, I feel that the way the campaign ran was quite positive. And would you attribute anything in particular as to what made the campaign a success in the first year as where it stands right now? And if there are much scope or challenges of changes to be made in the campaign as it stands right now?
Look, I think, you know, in terms of the success of it, and you know, I mean, our response rate is around the 20% mark. So, you know, we still have a lot of work to do. And, you know, that is one of the things that key learnings is that we need to remind people, we need to do pockets of dedicated promotion of the campaign to up our data. And again, re-emphasize the importance of data can help us measure our progress and be better. But you know, again, just reiterating the importance of, you know, really working with your stakeholders, i.e. in our case was the champions, in really getting that buy-in and trust from them to understand the purpose of the campaign. And in fact, when we launched it initially, we did an email. We put it, you know, we have branding around the firm. As our managing partner would have put it in his weekly email and the importance of it. And it was only when we went back to reminding people about it was when we used a video with various D&I champions across the business, from various like senior champions or senior people, and then more junior, and just a really good selection right across our diverse profile. And that really worked, because these people were saying, look, I want you to do this because it's really important to me, but also really important for us as an organization. And yeah, I would really encourage other companies maybe to do that, you know, if they haven't used video. It was a really worthwhile, because we felt it was a bit rushed. Myself and Ashley were going, no, we need to do this, and we just pulled it together. It wasn't the most professional, but it really worked. It absolutely really worked. Yeah.
I think in the end, it all comes about starting that conversation and building that trust and have this constant communication. It's not something that you said once and that's it, and that it's ongoing part of all the topics, all the chats and the conversations. And very smart of you to use the videos, because different things work for different people. So you did the print and the posters and the brand and the videos. So touching it at different points, again, whatever works for whoever, but it did. And I think that's brilliant. I think I'm going to open the conversation to the floor now. And once again, Sinead, Aisling, thank you so much for sharing these wonderful insights, and I'm sure very useful to everybody here. And we'll now go to the floor for any questions. I know we received some questions in advance, and I may start with those. There's a question, and Aisling, you may want to take this. This is a series of questions, but I'll read out to you. What was the methodology that was used? What questions did you ask, and what demographics did you seek? Where did you store the data? Who did you allow access to data? And how did you ensure to get a high response rate? So I think high response rate is something that we've spoken about already in terms of the communication, but others, if you want to take them.
Yeah. So we actually used our HRIS, which is Sage, and we worked with our specialist on the talent team and with a specialist in IT to create the fields for the different areas that we wanted to gather data on. The system is locked down to only super users, which essentially is 3 people: the IT person, the person on my team, and myself. It's so well locked down that we kind of struggled to get reports on it earlier on in the year when one of the team was on leave. So it's very secure, with limited access for anybody to get the data, and we can only run a report without names. So even if we wanted to, we couldn't run a report that actually lists people, identifying their names. So it is very limited access, and we were explicit in the campaign who would have us naming essentially the 3 individuals who could, if they wanted, access the data. but with the premise that we will not access the data. We will do a report for Elevate, and in time, hopefully, we'll be able to use that data to check ourselves, but not until we have more data included into it.
That's great, and I think that kind of gives a lot of trust and sense of security to people. The whole question in Linda's graph talking about the concerns about data privacy, and that kind of gets taken away by that.
They can also take it out themselves, so they have full access to it. So they put the data in their profile, but they can take it out at any point.
Oh, they can withdraw.
So, yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, and I think that flexibility is really important if you're running an open campaign. So that's that. And what demographics did you seek?
Oh, do you have the list there, Sinead?
Yes, I do. So gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, social mobility, and disability.
Perfect.
And in each of those, we kind of listed the agreed list for our champions, and then we always had an other, so people can self-identify in whatever way that they wanted.
Yeah. And actually, when I was talking earlier around the back and forth, the disability one, actually, you know, because as we know, there are so many disabilities, you know, so that was actually a difficult one to even contain, you know, and then particularly how you describe mental health conditions, you know, so that was yeah, that was an interesting one as well, just. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe a question quite related to the demographics. In my experience at a former employer, when it came to diversity demographics, the most discouraging aspect was the volume of people who prefer not to say. What are the strategies or best practices that exist for reducing that cohort?
I suppose we don't have that because you could put the data in or not. So I suppose we have 80% who have preferred not to say at this point, which doesn't sound like much of a success, but it's a good starting point, I think.
It is, yeah. And I think that's an interesting point, that if you don't want to say, then you don't put in the data, and that's where it has. Linda, I may come to you if there are any questions from the floor. You're on mute.
Seriously. Anyway, we have Elke Merchant has a question, and Elke, please feel free if you want to come in yourself and ask it. But it's about how the diversity champions were selected, and actually, I think I had a wider question about that exact thing as well, just because they say it sounds so effective, and I think it'd be interesting to just know, even in terms of how many diversity champions you have. How often do they meet? Is there a terms of reference for them? Just if you could give us a little flavor of that, I think that would be really useful.
Yeah, I can start, and then Aisling, you can add in anything. So basically, our diversity and inclusion champions are our committee members for all our D&I pillars. So as I mentioned, we have 5. So we have our DARE champions, which are our gender champions. Then we have 1ALG, which is our LGBT plus ally group. We've social mobility, and then we have accessibility, which focuses on disability, and we have cultural diversity. And within those committees, we have combined about 200 people, I would imagine. Of the active members of that, it's probably around 100, you know, people, and I suppose they would be our champions. So how do we choose our champions? We don't choose them. They choose themselves to volunteer to be part of our diversity and inclusion committees, and then we have an overall diversity and inclusion group as well, and we basically meet. The diversity and inclusion group meets once every 3 weeks, and then the various sub pillars, or the pillars meet. It depends on the makeup. I head up the accessibility. We meet every 4 weeks. Aisling's on cultural diversity. that would be once a
Every 6
month.
weeks.
And then the DARE champions, we actually meet more regularly. So that's and then, you know, we are very clear when we ask people to join our committees around the role, that their role, the commitment, what we expect from our people, and obviously there are some champions that are much more active, passionate, and want to be that voice, and then there are others that, you know, just want to kind of work away on the policy creation of policies and stuff. But so we, you know, in terms of the campaign, we were looking for volunteers to do the video. We're you know, we're looking for you to champion this. So, you know, that's how it developed.
It's also, I suppose, it sounds quite unwieldy, but we have D&I leads, so two partners, Sinead and myself, and each of us sit on at least one, if not two or three or more of those groups. And when we put our strategy together, the four of us are looking at that across the different pillars and seeing, you know, what's our focus? Do we have the common thread? You know, how are we going to move these forward, and how does it all link together for the year and going forward? So it's very cohesive, but we have a lot of active members as part of that, and all new hires as part of their induction have a session with various members, volunteers from our D&I groups, talking about the groups, what we do, and inviting them to participate.
Brilliant.
Great, thanks. There's no more questions in from the floor, but I have another one that I might pose myself. Oh, there's one coming in here, but I'm going to ask mine first while I read that one. It was just, I was interested, Sinead, when you said that there was kind of a bit of back and forward and toing and froing on the sexual orientation question and that, and I'm interested in that because we have heard that as well from a few companies, that it's like, well, why do we include sexual orientation in there? And actually I think it's really important, and we've referenced it in a number of the reports as well, because of the number of people who feel they can't bring their whole selves to work, they can't be openly out at work, and there's a big emotional tax. We can see that there's been a rise in hate speech against the LGBT plus community in Ireland. So I actually think it is really important. So I'd just be interested to know if there was any insights that you had on that, or
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with everything you say there, and that's one of the reasons why we included it. I mean, we did get some feedback from our younger members cohort of our firm around, yeah, why does it matter? You know, what sexuality I am? Why do you need to know this? But our one ALG committee were very supportive of it. And, you know, it's back to that piece of saying, you know, well, are we including all parts of society in our firm? You know, we would like to know what progress we are making when it comes to sexuality. Yeah, and interesting, and I don't know if anybody from KPMG is on the call. We went down the route of asking, you know, specifically, you know, to identify if you're gay, lesbian, straight, heterosexual. You know, we listed out, and you know, we've got a percentage of responses there. But I remember having a conversation with KPMG is when they listed out, they got a low response, but then when they asked the question of, do you identify yourself as from the LGBT plus community, they got a higher response rate. So I find that interesting, you know, so yeah.
Yeah, that is an interesting one, actually, and it reminds me of the disability piece and the diversibility, and you know, how maybe we need to be changing the language around that as well, in terms of what we're looking for. And we did a survey ourselves in Business in the Community, and we asked people, would they consider themselves having a disability? And I don't know, whatever percentage, 95% of people said no. But then we asked about, would you identify as having any of the following conditions or whatever? And it turned out we had about over 20% that identified with one that would be called under the CSO definitions, it would fit in with disability. So it is interesting in the way questions are posed and how you use it. And to be honest, I suppose if you know somebody identifies with the LGBT plus community, that's possibly enough, as opposed to knowing how so or that. So yeah, it is interesting.
That goes back to listening to your people and their preference. So my preference was just to ask that question because we don't need to know the detail, but actually it was really important to our one ALG group.
Okay,
so we felt that, you know, that they deserved us to include it the way that they wanted it included. Yeah,
that's really interesting. Yeah, and it's I think that's a really good insight. I'll go back to the questions that are here. So our company is planning to launch a new community. What would be the approach to take, and are there any recommendations, strategies or steps that we should follow to ensure its success? I hope I'm reading that properly. It's kind of gone off my screen. So I suppose, I mean, to an extent you've answered some of that, Sinead, in terms of that network of champions, and so the employee networks and how they feed into the community of champions. But is there anything else that you would either of you would recommend, strategies or steps to ensure that community is?
Sorry, I was rereading that because the word community kind of threw me. So I think it's back to what Aisling said there around having the D&I leads, you know, having that structure, you know, so you can so you know, having all of your subcommittees or committees, but then very much having the leadership piece above that, and that, you know, that there's that it feeds down and feeds up as well. That would be
I think having senior champions is really important as well. Like being in the meetings, being just one of all of the champions, but being seen to be actively involved as they are and supporting the community is very important.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, Richard, so I think we might have to wrap it up from there. What I would say to people is, if you have questions, if anything strikes you or that, do just email in anything that you have to the elevate@bitc.ie, and we'll do our best to come back. We'll actually update. We have an FAQ document on the questions around voluntary disclosure, and we'll update it based you know, to include some of the insights that we've come across today. But very big thank you, Sinead and Aisling, for sharing your insights. It's really brilliant. I had loads of thoughts and questions, so we'll come back to that another day, but I'm sure people found it really interesting. Richard, do you want to do the upcoming sessions?
Yes, before we close.
I'll share my screen.
Yeah, while you do that, Sinead, Aisling, like Linda said, thank you so much for coming in here today. I think it is great the way you contribute to the campaign and allowing others to learn from what you've done and inspire some others to possibly set up their own disclosure campaign. So thank you so much. For all the attendees, we have a few upcoming sessions for Elevate within this year. So Deloitte, as part of their Deloitte Impact Week, is hosting a webinar for the employment of asylum seekers and refugees. The link for the registration will be shared when these slides are shared with you. Afterwards, it's on the 10th of October from 3 p.m. We are running a recruitment session for the supply chain of our member company. So if you have any supply chain companies that you think would be interested in or would benefit from the Elevate Pledge, please direct them to the session. It will be hosted on the 17th of October. And the third one is on the topic of employment of people with disability. So our own colleagues from the employability team within Business in the Community will take us through the session. It's being hosted on 23rd of October in the morning, 11 a.m. Again, all of the registration links will be shared ahead of the sessions with all of you with the slides. So please feel free to share this within the teams if you think there's somebody else relevant in the team who would like to attend. And that's it.
Richard, I'd just say on that first one that Deloitte are hosting, that session is coming about from their own internal experience of hiring people from the community of asylum seekers and refugees, and they're understanding that there's a lot of barriers or perceived barriers that employers have, and so they're going to share what they have done and how they've made a success of it, which I think it would be really interesting.
Brilliant. Well, that brings us to a close. So thank you, Aisling and Sinead, once again. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Have a lovely day.
Business in the Community Ireland.